They say you never notice the moment your life begins to fall apart until it's too late. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact day everything started to change. Though back then, it felt like any other Monday morning. I'd been working at Harrington & Co., a mid-sized marketing firm in the city, for almost 6 years. To me, it wasn't just a job. It was a dream I'd built from the ground up. I started as an intern, working late nights, chasing impossible deadlines, and saying yes to every challenge my boss, Mr. Grant, threw my way. Mr. Grant. He wasn't an easy man to work for. He was sharp, demanding, and had a stare that could slice through your confidence. But if you proved your worth, he'd respect you. Or at least that's what I believed. Over the years, I became one of his most trusted employees. He'd often call me his right hand. Those words meant everything to me. I thought loyalty and hard work actually mattered in this world. The office itself was always buzzing, the constant clicking of keyboards, the smell of burnt coffee, and the sound of phones ringing like an endless rhythm of ambition. We were a small team, but we worked like a family. Or so I thought. I remember one morning vividly, the day Ethan walked in, Mr. Grant's nephew. He was young, barely out of college, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The moment he walked through those glass doors, the air in the room shifted. People whispered, curious who the new guy was. Mr. Grant introduced him with a proud smile, saying, "Everyone, this is my nephew Ethan. He'll be joining us for some time. Learn the ropes." At first, I didn't think much of it. Family helping family. Nothing unusual, right? But over the next few days, I began to notice little things. Ethan arriving late, yet no one saying a word. Ethan missing deadlines, yet somehow getting praised for his fresh perspective. And when we presented projects in meetings, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence, and Mr. Grant would just smile. I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was just tired. But deep down, something didn't feel right. There were moments, subtle, fleeting ones, when I'd catch Mr. Grant watching Ethan with pride, the kind he never showed me. Or when my suggestions suddenly got overlooked in favor of Ethan's half-baked ideas. Still, I told myself to keep going. I believed loyalty would be noticed, that dedication always pays off. I had no idea how wrong I was. Because in that bright office filled with laughter, ambition, and the sound of success, my downfall had already begun. I just didn't know my loyalty was about to be tested. Ethan settled into the office faster than I expected, or maybe the better word is entitled. He wasn't just new, he was untouchable. In the beginning, I tried to help him. I showed him how to handle clients, how to read between the lines of marketing data, how to pitch without sounding rehearsed. But every time I offered guidance, he'd smirk, that kind of arrogant grin that said, "I already know better." He'd walk around the office with his sleeves rolled up, tossing around buzzwords he'd probably learned off YouTube, acting like a genius in a room full of professionals who'd spent years mastering the craft. And what was worse, people began to play along. Because when your boss's nephew speaks, everyone listens, whether he makes sense or not. At first, Mr. Grant's favoritism was subtle, almost invisible to an outsider. Ethan was assigned to shadow me, yet somehow he ended up leading my projects. He started attending executive meetings I wasn't even invited to. One day, I walked past Mr. Grant's office and overheard him say, "Ethan's got great instincts. Maybe he'll take over the new client pitch." That new client pitch? It was mine. I had spent 2 weeks preparing it. Every slide, every line, every strategy. Hearing those words felt like a slow stab to the chest. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because in that moment I realized loyalty doesn't stand a chance against blood. Still, I told myself it was temporary, that Mr. Grant was just giving Ethan a chance to learn. But the weeks passed and things only got worse. Ethan started taking credit for my work. Ideas I'd shared in private suddenly appeared in his presentations, word for word. When clients praised his creativity, he'd smile and glance at me like he was daring me to speak up. And when mistakes happened, when a campaign flopped or a deadline was missed, guess who took the blame? Me. It's a strange kind of pain, watching someone dismantle everything you've built while your boss looks at you like you've suddenly become invisible. There were nights I'd stay back long after everyone left, staring at the city lights outside the office window, wondering if my hard work had ever really mattered. My coffee would go cold as I replayed conversations in my head, trying to understand where it all went wrong. Was I too trusting? Too quiet? Too loyal? Sometimes Ethan would linger late too, not to work, but to show off. He'd lean against my desk, spinning his pen between his fingers and say things like, "You've been here forever, right? Must be tough seeing things change." He'd say it with a smirk, walk away and leave me fuming in silence. The atmosphere in the office began to change. The laughter felt fake. The teamwork felt forced. And every time I looked at Mr. Grant, I couldn't tell if he saw me as an asset or an obstacle. Still, I held it all in. I didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to give them a reason to call me bitter or jealous. So I buried my frustration under forced smiles and long hours, telling myself things would balance out. But deep down, something dark was growing. A silent anger, the kind that simmers just below the surface, waiting for the right spark to ignite. And that spark came sooner than I ever expected. Because one morning, I walked into the office and saw my name missing from a project I'd led for months. Ethan's name was there instead, bold and centered. I felt my heart drop. My hands went cold. That's when I heard Mr. Grant's voice behind me. "We'll talk after the meeting. I have some news." I didn't know it then. But that meeting would change everything. The meeting room was cold that morning. Not the kind of cold you feel in your skin. The kind that settles in your chest, where something deep inside already knows what's coming. Mr. Grant sat at the far end of the long wooden table, his laptop open, eyes fixed on a screen that wasn't really showing anything important. Ethan sat beside him, pretending to scroll through files, trying too hard to look serious. I closed the door behind me. The sound echoed in the silence. "You wanted to see me, sir?" I asked. He didn't look up right away. He just sighed, the kind of sigh that makes your stomach drop before you even hear the words. "Yes," he said finally, adjusting his tie. "Have a seat." I sat down, my hands tightening around the edge of the chair. Ethan's smirk flickered for just a second before he masked it with fake concern. "You've been with us for a long time," Mr. Grant began, "and I want you to know that your work has always been appreciated." Appreciated. The word felt empty, like a thank you card before a breakup. He cleared his throat and continued, "But the company is evolving. We need fresh energy, new ideas. The industry is changing, and we need people who can keep up." I blinked, confused. "Keep up?" I repeated. "Sir, I've led every major campaign this year. The clients," he cut me off. "It's not about your performance. It's about direction, fit. You're not fitting in with the new structure we're moving toward." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and unreal. Not fitting in? After 6 years of building his trust, his brand, his company? I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just kept pretending to scroll, that smug curve at the corner of his mouth giving everything away. "So," Mr. Grant said, shifting papers, "we're letting you go. Effective immediately. HR will handle the details." That was it. No warning. No second chance. Just done. It felt like the room had shrunk, like the walls were pressing in on me. My throat burned as I tried to find words, but nothing came out. "After everything I've done," I finally whispered. "All the nights I stayed late, all the clients I brought in. You're just, it's business," he interrupted. "Don't take it personally. Business." That word cut deeper than any insult. I stood up slowly, fighting the trembling in my hands. I wanted to shout, to throw every file on the floor, to tell him exactly what kind of man he really was. But all I managed to say was, "I understand." Because I did. I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't about fresh ideas or new directions. It was about Ethan, about bloodlines, about power. Ethan finally looked up, and this time he didn't hide it. That smirk, that tiny victorious smile that said, "I won." And for a brief second, rage flared inside me, hot, blinding, and sharp. but I swallowed it. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I walked out of that office with my head high, even though every step felt heavier than the last. My coworkers stared as I passed. Whispers followed me like shadows. By the time I reached the elevator, my chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything I'd ever worked for. When the doors closed, I finally exhaled. The reflection staring back at me looked broken. But beneath the heartbreak, there was something else, something fierce, something alive. I didn't cry that day, not because it didn't hurt, but because deep down I knew the story wasn't over. They thought they'd destroyed me. They thought they'd won, but they'd just lit a fire I didn't know I had. They took everything from me, but not for long. For the first week after they let me go, I moved through the days like a ghost. Mornings came and went without meaning. The alarm that used to pull me into purpose now felt like an insult. I watered a plant I couldn't keep alive, made coffee I couldn't taste, and watched the city outside my window go on as if nothing had happened. Friends texted. I answered with half-truths. I told people I was taking a break, because the simpler lie felt safer than saying I was betrayed. At night, the weight of it all came down like a wet blanket. I'd scroll through old emails, campaign approvals, client praise, the little notes Mr. Grant had sent me over the years, and wonder when the meaning had slipped away. There were moments I questioned myself. Was I blind? Did I miss signs? Had I failed somewhere without realizing? The self-doubt was a quiet, corrosive thing. It crept into the corners of my mind and rearranged memories into guilt. Yet through the fog, one person would not let me disappear. Maya, my closest friend, the one who knew the real version of me, the version that didn't need validation from a title on a company org chart. She sat with me on my small balcony one evening, 2 mugs between us, city lights blurry like distant stars. "You look like someone who's been punched," she said, blunt and tender at once. "Feels worse," I admitted. "Feels like I was erased." Maya didn't offer platitudes. She did what she always did. She listened, asked the right questions, and pulled out the corners of the truth until it showed. She reminded me of things I'd forgotten I'd achieved. She reminded me I had a mind that solved problems, not one that folded under them. "You're not the kind of person who lets someone write the end of your story," she said, voice steady. "You're the author, so stop reading that chapter where you lose." Her words landed like a push. That night, I slept for the first time without the room spinning. Not because I was healed, but because the idea of sitting in silence forever felt unbearable. Slowly, resentment shifted into something else, a curiosity I hadn't expected. If Mr. Grant could fire me for his nephew, if he could look at 6 years of work and discard it with rehearsed sympathy, what else was he willing to sacrifice? What corners of the company had he bent to suit himself? Those questions began as murmurs and grew into a plan. I started small. I reread files I had access to when I was there, the documents I'd helped shape. I called a few old colleagues under the pretense of catching up and watched how they shifted when I mentioned Ethan, a pattern. Emerged offhand comments about flexibility in hiring, whispers about clients shifted to different accounts, a suggestion that some invoices went missing and were quietly written off. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to feel the shape of something crooked. It surprised me how quiet the world became when you stopped pretending. Without the constant noise of work, the gaps between things became clearer. I noticed details I had missed in the rush of deadlines, vague approvals signed by holding companies I didn't recognize, late-night emails from a vendor I'd never heard of, expense reports with line items that didn't add up. Each small inconsistency was a stone turned over, nothing dramatic on its own, but together they suggested a path. I could have let my anger lead. I could have stormed into Mr. Grant's office, hurled the truth at him, and walked out with a dramatic flourish. It felt satisfying to imagine. But satisfaction is a short, burning thing. It doesn't fix bills, it doesn't clear your name, and it rarely lasts. I had learned early that justice earned through theatrics rarely changes systems. So I chose another road, intelligence over impulse, strategy over spectacle. If I wanted to win, I needed evidence. not just my word against his. I needed files, witnesses, the kind of paper trail that would make it impossible for him to smooth things over with a charming apology. I wanted a method that would expose the rot without giving them a chance to gaslight the narrative back into a lie. Maya became my first ally in the plan. She helped me set boundaries, reminded me to breathe, and, when things got cold and technical, kept me tethered to the human parts of the story. "Don't become them," she said once, the warning clear. "Expose them. Don't imitate them." I scavenged what I could legally and ethically. I reached out to former clients who had sounded oddly distant in past meetings. I messaged old teammates who had left in ways that hadn't made sense at the time. I kept every receipt, every stray email, every fragment of memory that suggested something was off. At night, I'd lay the bits out on my kitchen table like a puzzle, and for the first time since I left, I felt useful in a real, deliberate way. There were moments of loneliness. There were nights I wanted to collapse under the weight of it all and disappear into a quieter life. But each small discovery became fuel. A mismatched invoice here, a whispered confession there. The list grew, and with it, a cold clarity. This wasn't only about Ethan taking my place. This was about a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. I wasn't going to fight him with fury. I was going to fight him with facts. I would expose the hidden corners he relied on. The deals, the favors, the quiet edits that made the company's ledger lie. And I would do it in a way that couldn't be shrugged off as the bitterness of a fired employee. So I planned. I mapped timelines. I drafted anonymous tips. I built backups. Each step felt like rebuilding a house after a storm. Slow, methodical, and necessary. When I finally stood up, my shoulders were straighter. The hurt was still there, warm and sharp, but it had a new companion, a resolve that didn't need witnesses. They thought they'd knocked me down for good. They thought they'd taken more than they could from me. They were wrong. If they wanted a storm, they'd get one. The first few days after my resolve solidified were quiet. Too quiet, in a way that made every sound in my apartment feel amplified. The hum of the fridge, the distant sirens, even the click of my keyboard. I spent hours revisiting old company files I had access to before I was fired, reading contracts and spreadsheets I'd once skimmed over. At first, it was like walking through familiar rooms in a house I no longer lived in. But the more I looked, the more I noticed things that didn't make sense. Tiny anomalies, little gaps that had been invisible when I was focused on deadlines, invoices that didn't add up, payments marked cleared but missing signatures, vendors I didn't remember meeting. It was subtle, but my gut told me something was off. And if something was off here, I had to dig deeper. I started quietly reaching out to old colleagues, people who had left the company for one reason or another. I framed it as casual catch-ups, coffee, lunch, checking in. But in each conversation, I probed gently, watching expressions, listening for hesitation. One by one, the pieces began to emerge. A friend in accounting let slip about last-minute adjustments to client invoices. Another, in operations, mentioned that certain project funds seemed to vanish without explanation, only to be redirected by Ethan on Mr. Grant's approval. The patterns were subtle, but they were there. I had to be careful. Every step had to be precise. One wrong move, one obvious question too loud, and my plan could collapse before it began. So I collected every scrap of information: emails, scanned receipts, internal memos I'd kept, screenshots from systems I could still access. Slowly, quietly, I was building a map of the company's hidden operations. Then came the first unmistakable sign: Ethan's fingerprints. I stumbled across a series of approvals in the company system that didn't make sense. Budgets were shifted under his name. Expenses were approved without proper review. Clients were reassigned without any explanation. And when I dug into the email chains, I found him directing others to bend rules, mask errors, and hide transactions from leadership reports. I couldn't believe it at first. My stomach sank. The arrogance, the smirks, the casual overstepping. It wasn't incompetence. It was corruption. I spent long nights cross-referencing everything, building a timeline of Ethan's moves, and piecing together how Mr. Grant either turned a blind eye or actively encouraged it. Every document, every snippet of evidence was another thread I could pull, and pulling the threads made the whole pattern more visible. There were moments when I caught myself holding my breath. Every discovery brought excitement, yes, but also fear. If I wasn't careful, the very people I was investigating could trace the investigation back to me. So I moved like a shadow, quiet, deliberate, invisible. I even started reaching out to former clients who had quietly complained about missed deadlines, mismanaged funds, or strange adjustments that had been brushed aside. Each conversation added more pieces to the puzzle. Some were hesitant, fearful of repercussions. Others were grateful to finally speak, almost as if they had been waiting for someone to expose the truth. And with every new piece of information, I felt my resolve strengthen. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was uncovering the rot at the heart of the company, exposing the nepotism, the corruption, the betrayal that had been swept under the rug. Finally, late one night, I connected an email chain, a series of approvals, and an internal memo that linked Ethan directly to a significant misappropriation of client funds. The evidence was subtle but undeniable. My pulse raced as I stared at the screen. It was all there, all the pieces lining up like dominoes. The nepotism, the manipulation, the lies, everything pointing to a critical vulnerability in the company's structure. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. The city lights outside my window blurred as my mind raced. The plan I had been forming, step by step, suddenly felt real, tangible. I could see the path forward. And then I whispered to myself, a mix of fear and anticipation. And there it was, the crack in their empire. Once I had the evidence, the plan became clear. But having a plan is nothing without execution, and execution is a dangerous game. I started small, testing the waters. Anonymous emails, carefully worded tips to former colleagues, subtle inquiries to clients who had been wronged. Each message was calculated, leaving no trace back to me. I watched from the sidelines, feeling the ripple of unease spread through the company. It was intoxicating. The knowledge that for once the power was mine. But it was also terrifying. Every time I pressed send, a shiver ran down my spine. What if I was discovered? What if everything I had painstakingly gathered crumbled in an instant? Close calls were inevitable. One afternoon, I nearly tripped when Ethan walked into the cafe I used to meet a former colleague. He glanced in my direction, and for a second our eyes locked. My heart froze. I nodded politely, hoping my calm expression masked the storm inside. He had no idea how close he had come to being exposed. Late at night, alone in my apartment, memories flashed unbidden. The day I was fired, the humiliation, the way Ethan had smirked, and Mr. Grant had watched without remorse. The anger flared, hot and raw. I clenched my fists, reminding myself that acting on emotion would ruin everything. This was not about venting fury. It was about strategy. And yet, amid the thrill of control, a question gnawed at me. Am I becoming like them? I had spent years criticizing greed, arrogance, and betrayal. And now, in secret, I was manipulating, plotting, using hidden channels to pull people like pawns. Could I justify the ends by the means? Was revenge still justice if it left me walking a fine line between right and wrong? I wrestled with it, night after night, but something kept me going. Not pride, not spite, clarity. Truth had to come to light, and I would be the one to reveal it. Step by step, the pieces of the puzzle moved into place. Leaked reports were quietly verified. Emails were forwarded strategically. Old colleagues who had felt powerless before now had a voice, and they trusted me to speak for them. Every discreet tip, every trace of evidence I released started to unsettle the company. The tension was electric. I could feel it even from miles away, watching the chaos unfold through indirect channels. My phone buzzed with replies from former clients. Whispers of suspicion drifted through the corporate halls. A misallocated fund here, a confused manager there. All small tremors that hinted at a bigger quake. Even in these moments, I reminded myself, patience was key. The storm had to arrive at the right time, fully formed. One misstep and the plan would collapse like a house of cards. I took a deep breath and looked at the evidence laid out in front of me, organized like a battlefield map. Everything aligned perfectly. The timeline was airtight. The leaks were primed. Tomorrow would be the day when every secret, every lie, every betrayal would stand exposed. For the first time in weeks, a faint smile touched my lips. Tomorrow the world would know the truth. The morning was ordinary. Or at least that's what the city looked like. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, eyes glued to the news feed. And then it began. The leaks hit the internet first. Anonymous posts, carefully phrased messages, screenshots of emails and financial reports. They spread faster than I imagined, like wildfire in dry grass. Social media buzzed with speculation. Industry forums lit up with insiders dissecting every document, every irregularity. Inside the company, chaos erupted almost immediately. Managers scrambled to explain missing funds, misplaced clients, and irregular approvals. Phone calls flew in every direction. Employees whispered in the hallways, confused, scared, and angry. And there, at the eye of the storm, was Mr. Grant. I watched him on a live business channel, flustered, pale, trying to maintain composure. His voice cracked under the weight of questions. These allegations, we're investigating. We take every claim seriously, but... He faltered, searching for words that wouldn't come. Beside him, Ethan fidgeted nervously, shoving papers into his briefcase. He denied everything, of course, vehemently, loudly, but the strain in his eyes betrayed him. I could almost hear the lie clawing at him, desperate for escape. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat, not yet. I simply sat there silently, feeling the slow burn of satisfaction rise in my chest. Every carefully collected document, every quiet conversation with former colleagues, every detail I had traced. It was working. Justice wasn't just possible anymore. It was happening. I remembered the nights I spent replaying Mr. Grant's smirk, Ethan's arrogance, the humiliation of the firing, the anger I had swallowed, the tears I had refused to shed. They all seemed to converge into this moment. Not revenge as a spectacle, but as a revelation. The truth was more powerful than any outburst I could have delivered. And yet, even as the company began to crumble under scrutiny, I knew I wasn't finished. The leaks had shaken them, but the final pieces of the puzzle, the absolute proof that would make the board, the investors, the clients realize the depth of corruption, had to be placed carefully. Timing was everything. I leaned back, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. There was an almost poetic symmetry to it. The quiet worker, dismissed and overlooked, orchestrating the unveiling of the empire that had once dismissed her. I felt relief, yes, but it was tempered with anticipation. The real reckoning was still to come. And as the world began to watch them unravel, I whispered to myself, steady and cold, but full of the fire I had stoked for months. They thought they'd buried me, but I was the storm. By midweek, the storm I had quietly brewed became impossible to ignore. Investigations had officially begun. Regulatory agencies reached out. Clients questioned past contracts. Media outlets, always hungry for a scandal, seized the story with a ferocity I had anticipated but never expected to feel so real. I watched it unfold from a quiet corner of my apartment, a mixture of apprehension and calm settling over me. Headlines screamed accusations. Marketing firm plagued by nepotism and corruption. CEO under fire for mismanagement and hidden deals. The board demanded explanations. Investors pulled funds, and clients reconsidered partnerships. Every headline, every news alert, was a nail in the coffin of a company that had once dismissed me without a second thought. Mr. Grant appeared on television again, this time more composed, but his usual confidence was gone. The polished veneer of authority cracked under scrutiny. He tried to spin the narrative, citing internal reviews and miscommunication, but the public, the media, and his own employees were no longer listening. His empire was fracturing in real time. And Ethan, watching him stumble was almost surreal. The smirk that had haunted my nights for months vanished completely. Caught lying to investigators, his direct involvement in unethical dealings laid bare, he tried to defend himself with feigned ignorance, but every lie only dug him deeper. Emails, approvals, mismanaged client funds, all traced back to him. I could feel a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction, because justice was no longer a distant concept. Justice was happening. Sorrow, because the people I once knew, my colleagues, the friends I'd tried to trust, were collateral in a battle that had begun long before I even realized. And yet, even as their empire crumbled, I didn't feel triumphant in the way I had imagined. No fireworks, no cheers, just a quiet, powerful awareness that truth had its own momentum. That what had been hidden, dismissed, and corrupted could now be seen clearly by everyone. I replayed every late night, every frustration, every quiet moment when I had held back tears or words. They had fueled me, yes, but they also left a hollow space in my chest that no amount of victory could fill. Revenge had a taste, but it wasn't sweet. It was illuminating. The final reports came through. Investors demanded refunds, contracts were voided, and internal audits confirmed everything I had suspected. Ethan faced disciplinary action and legal scrutiny. Mr. Grant resigned, humiliated, his credibility shattered beyond repair. The office that once echoed with ambition and laughter now felt hollow and fragile. I sat back, letting the reality sink in. The storm I had become had passed through, leaving destruction for those who had thought they could play with people's lives. And yet, I realized, my anger had not vanished. It had evolved into clarity, into understanding. I had won, but winning was not the same as healing. The scars of betrayal, the sting of being discarded, the months of quiet planning and sleepless nights, they remained. And in that bittersweet silence, I whispered to myself, the words both a warning and a lesson. Revenge doesn't heal. It reveals. It wasn't long after the media storm had settled that I received a message from Mr. Grant. Can we meet? I want to explain. I stared at the screen for a long moment, coffee cooling beside me. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me knew I had to see it through. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about closure. We met at a neutral cafe, quiet, nondescript. He arrived, suit slightly rumpled, eyes avoiding mine. There was none of the arrogance I remembered. Only a man weighed down by the consequences of his own choices. I never meant for it to go this far, he started, voice unsteady. I thought giving Ethan opportunities would help the company grow. I didn't realize... You didn't realize what? I asked softly. That loyalty, dedication, and hard work could be discarded like a notebook after a meeting? He flinched, and I realized something. The man who once held power over my life was now almost powerless himself. The arrogance had been stripped away by the weight of exposure, and beneath it was a person who had let ambition blind his judgment. We didn't argue. We didn't fight. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match. Just words that reflected months of hurt and betrayal, and a quiet understanding that the past could not be rewritten. As I walked away from that meeting, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had fueled my nights of planning and investigation softened. Revenge had served its purpose, not as a source of joy, but as a vehicle for truth and justice. I realized then that my life had been on pause while I orchestrated this storm. And now, with the dust settling, I had a choice. To continue being defined by betrayal, or to reclaim my dignity and move forward. I started small. I updated my resume, reached out to former colleagues, and accepted a position at a new company that valued integrity over nepotism. The work was fulfilling, the environment healthy, and for the first time in months, I looked forward to Monday mornings without dread. Evenings were quieter. Coffee on my balcony, books in hand, conversations with friends who reminded me of simpler joys. I didn't need recognition, titles, or vindication. I had reclaimed something more valuable, peace. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a window or mirror, I see the scars of those months, the sleepless nights, the emotional battles, the quiet rage. And I smile. Not with triumph, but with understanding. Life has a way of teaching you lessons you don't expect. I learned that revenge can reveal the truth, but it doesn't heal the heart. Healing comes from within, from choosing dignity over bitterness, clarity over obsession, and life over the shadows of the past. And as I finally sip my coffee on a calm morning, I reflect quietly. Sometimes, losing everything shows you what truly matters. If you've followed my story this far, I want you to hear this. Not as a warning, not as revenge, but as something I learned the hard way. Loyalty, dedication, hard work. They mean nothing to the disloyal. They can be discarded, ignored, even mocked. I know that now better than ever. But integrity? Integrity always carries weight. It survives. It wins quietly, in ways you might not see immediately, but it always does. I want you to understand something I learned in the fire of my own storm. Revenge doesn't bring joy. It doesn't heal the hurt or erase the betrayal. What it does is reveal the truth. It exposes lies, shows the cracks in deception, and sometimes it simply clears the path for your own peace to return. There were moments when I wanted to let anger consume me, when I wanted to shout, to burn bridges, to make him feel what I had felt. But in the end, none of that mattered. Watching the truth unfold, seeing the consequences of their actions and reclaiming my life, that was enough. That was victory. Now, months later, I have something I didn't have before: perspective. A new job, calm mornings, genuine colleagues, and the knowledge that I didn't have to sacrifice who I am to make things right. Redemption isn't about others paying. It's about standing tall when the dust settles, knowing you stayed true to yourself. So, if you're facing betrayal, remember this: power blinded him. His choices destroyed him. And no matter how deep the shadows feel, integrity will guide you through. I didn't need to destroy him. I didn't need to shout my triumph. I only needed to stay vigilant, stay true, and let the consequences do the rest. And in the quiet moments when I look back, I realize the truth that no amount of anger or planning could have taught me alone. In the end, I didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself. The storm has passed. The world moves on, and I am finally free.